Sometimes the biggest story isn't the game-winning shot, it's what happens after it. A single reaction from Caitlin Clark to Kelsey Mitchell's incredible three-pointer sparked a conversation that reached far beyond one highlight. Was it simply teammates celebrating, or evidence of a partnership that's become the heartbeat of the Indiana Fever?
Mitchell and Clark both having 14 points at the break, more than anything at this game.
From viral fan reactions to mutual respect, major roster decisions, and unforgettable moments, let's break down why this connection has become one of the league's most talked about stories. The hidden story behind Mitchell's big shot. The exchange itself unfolded in the third quarter of a matchup against the New York Liberty. Mitchell caught a pass on the wing, rose into a contested three-pointer, absorbed contact on the release, and watched the ball drop through the net anyway. The building erupted, and so did the Fever bench, with Clark visibly hyping up the play from several feet away. It was the kind of moment built for a highlight reel, not because of the degree of difficulty alone, but because of how rarely Mitchell allows herself an outward reaction to her own scoring. Reporters asked Clark about the exchange 2 days later, during a scheduled media availability that typically covers matchup previews and injury updates rather than teammate dynamics.
The ball went to the middle of the floor, and Caitlin Clark struggling right there. You hate to see that.
Yep.
Her response leaned into exactly that detail anyway. She called the moment cute, and noted that Mitchell rarely seemed surprised by her own production, even suggesting that this particular shot might have caught Mitchell a little off guard as well. Why would a 9-year veteran's own teammate find her scoring surprising at all? The answer says less about Mitchell's shot-making, which has never been in question, and more about how unusual it is for her to let a moment show on her face. Clark's comment functioned as a small character study delivered in a single sentence, an observation about a teammate's typical composure, offered with the kind of familiarity that only comes from sharing a backcourt for parts of 3 seasons. It is worth noting how specific the observation was. Clark did not simply call the play impressive or exciting, language that would have applied to almost any highlight in the league that week. She commented on Mitchell's internal reaction to her own success, a detail that requires paying close attention to a teammate over a long stretch of time.
Fever teammate after making one coming back down the other way.
Mitchell with the response, those teammates.
Rather than reacting to a single possession in isolation. That kind of specificity tends to separate genuine familiarity from the generic praise athletes offer reflexively when a microphone is pointed in their direction. The exchange also fit into a broader in-game pattern that had developed between the two guards over the course of the season. Broadcast cameras have repeatedly caught Clark and Mitchell communicating on the bench between possessions, pointing out defensive coverages to each other and celebrating one another's shots with a familiarity that stands out even among teammates who have played together for years. None of that guarantees anything about how two athletes actually feel about each other away from the cameras, but it does establish a consistent, repeated pattern rather than a single isolated clip taken out of context. The fan reaction. Neither the July exchange nor the earlier profile video went unnoticed by fans already primed to track every public interaction between the two players.
Clark, the backdoor pass to Mitchell. Oh, the 1-2 connection, and you can put one more on it.
Clips of both moments circulated widely, generating the kind of engagement usually reserved for actual game highlights, rather than press conference sound bites or behind-the-scenes content. That level of attention says something about how invested the fan base has become in the relationship itself, not just in either player's individual statistics. Part of that investment traces back to how rare this specific dynamic is across professional sports more broadly. Superstar and steady veteran pairings exist in plenty of locker rooms, but they rarely generate this much sustained public affection, largely because the superstar in question rarely spends this much unscripted time publicly crediting the veteran for the partnership's success. Most stars, even generous ones, tend to speak in generalities when discussing teammates, praising effort, praising the group, praising the culture. Clark's comments have consistently avoided that shortcut, naming specific skills and specific moments instead.
Some really close defense against Clark. Inside, another deflection. Turnover, forced by the Fever. Look at Mitchell.
Fans picked up on that distinction quickly, and it shaped how each new clip got received, treated less as routine media obligation and more as further evidence supporting an already well-established narrative about the two players. That reception also reflects something about how the fan base watches this particular roster compared to others around the league. A significant share of the audience following the Fever closely arrived specifically because of Clark, and that audience has consistently shown interest in the relationships surrounding her, not simply her individual statistics. A three-pointer through contact is a notable basketball play on its own. The same play, followed by a specific, affectionate comment from the sport's most watched player about the teammate who made it, becomes a different kind of story entirely, one that spreads well beyond the usual audience for late-season regular game highlights. The respect that went beyond basketball. The fuller picture of what Clark thinks about Mitchell surfaced earlier in the year.
I just appreciate the opportunity to kind of be a part of every time.
Next question is staying in the second row center.
Kelsey, Caitlin said that
in a team-produced profile video built around Mitchell's game, asked to share her thoughts, Clark did not offer a brief compliment and move on. She built out a detailed case, describing Mitchell as someone with no better backcourt partner in the entire league, before running through specifics: her speed relative to the rest of the roster, her ability to create separation as a cutter, her shooting touch, and her commitment on the defensive end from baseline to baseline. That last detail matters more than it might first appear. Praising a teammate's offense is common. Nearly every player asked about a teammate on camera will mention scoring ability, because it is the easiest thing to point to and the safest thing to say. Praising a teammate's willingness to defend the full length of the court, unglamorous and rarely captured on a highlight reel, is a more specific kind of respect. It is the sort typically reserved for players whose value a teammate has actually studied over months of practices and film sessions, rather than simply appreciated from a distance during a scoring run. Clark closed her comments by calling Mitchell simply a good teammate and a good person, a pairing of basketball praise and character praise that rarely shows up together in a scripted team media moment, where most athletes stick to safer, more generic compliments about effort or work ethic. A separate clip from earlier in the year reinforced the same theme in a lighter setting.
Here's Mitchell, so speedy, dives in for two. A logo bomb as Caitlin Clark
handed a phone during a team content segment and asked to pass it along. Clark introduced the next player as the fastest player in the league before handing things off to Mitchell. Some players use these moments for comedy, deflecting with a joke or a nickname rather than a genuine claim. Clark used hers once again to make a specific claim about Mitchell's game, one that plenty of observers might debate given the league's overall depth at the position, but one Clark has now made more than once, in more than one setting, without hesitation or qualification. Repetition across separate, unscripted contexts is exactly what turns an offhand compliment into something closer to a settled opinion. Actions speak louder than words. Compliments delivered on camera are easy to dismiss as scripted positivity, the kind of thing a media relations department nudges players toward before a scheduled shoot. What makes Clark's specific praise of Mitchell harder to wave off is the roster decision that accompanied it.
She's had 10 straight games of at least 2 made threes as Mitchell splashes in one.
During the offseason, Mitchell entered restricted free agency, placing her market value and her future with the Fever in question for the first time in her career. Restricted free agency carries real uncertainty even for accomplished veterans. Other franchises can extend offers, and the original team has to decide quickly whether matching that offer is worth the cost against a roster already built around one enormous contract at the top. The organization did not wait to find out what other teams might offer. Mitchell became the very first player the Fever re-signed once the free agency window opened. a sequencing decision that signals exactly how the front office ranked its own priorities that offseason, ahead of every other roster need on the table. Isn't it worth asking why an organization built around one of the most recognizable superstars in the sport moved fastest to secure her backcourt partner rather than any other piece on the roster? The answer lines up cleanly with what Clark had already been saying in interviews and team media segments for months, well before the free agency window ever opened. A front office does not need its franchise players' public praise to make a re-signing decision. Roster construction runs on analytics, salary structure, and coaching input long before it runs on sentiment. But when the two happen to align this closely, the star naming her the best backcourt partner in the league, and the front office racing to keep her before any competing offer could even materialize, the compliment stops looking like a scripted talking point and starts looking like an accurate read on the roster's actual hierarchy of value. There is also a broader team-building context worth considering. Franchises built around a single transcendent star face a persistent structural challenge.
Clark knocks it away. Boston with the steal. Clark 2-on-1. She feeds Mitchell.
Finding complementary pieces willing to accept a smaller share of the spotlight while still performing at a level that makes the whole roster competitive. That balance is far harder to strike than it sounds, and plenty of teams built around one dominant scorer have failed to solve it, watching secondary pieces either underperform in the shadow of the star or leave as soon as a better opportunity elsewhere presents itself. Mitchell's willingness to stay, and the organization's willingness to prioritize keeping her, suggests the Fever found a version of that balance that many comparable franchises have not. The season that changed everything. None of this context carries much weight without the season that came before it. A series of lower body injuries limited Clark to only 13 appearances the previous year, removing the Fever's most productive scorer and playmaker for the vast majority of the schedule. For a franchise that had built its entire national profile around one player's arrival, that absence could easily have unraveled the season entirely, both competitively and in terms of public attention. Instead, the team found a way to remain relevant and, more importantly, remain competitive. Mitchell absorbed the difference, carrying a significantly heavier offensive workload than her typical role required, night after night.
Mitchell on another three. Kelsey Mitchell has been over this 4-game winning streak.
Without the benefit of her usual backcourt partner drawing attention away from her on the perimeter. Opposing defenses could commit extra attention to her without worrying about a second primary scoring threat alongside her, and she still produced at a level that kept the team in playoff contention through the second half of the season. That is a very different kind of production than scoring efficiently inside an offense already built to create open looks. It is scoring efficiently while functioning as the offense's clear focal point, an entirely different job description than the one Mitchell had signed up for at the start of her career in Indiana. The results defied what most outside observers expected from a team missing its biggest name for most of the year. The Fever won their franchise's first Commissioner's Cup and finished the regular season with a record of 24 wins against 20 games, their best mark since well before Clark ever arrived in Indiana, before advancing to the playoff semifinals. Should a team missing its most prominent player for the majority of a season have performed that well? The honest answer is that it should not have, under normal circumstances. And the player most responsible for defying that expectation was the same one Clark would later describe, without hesitation, as irreplaceable. The postseason run itself added another layer to the story. Facing a deep, experienced Las Vegas roster in the semifinals, the Fever pushed the series to 5 games, despite missing the exact player most analysts had flagged before the season as the team's ceiling raiser. That kind of postseason resilience rarely happens by accident. It typically requires a core group of returning players who already trust each other's tendencies under pressure, built up over an entire season of high-stakes possessions rather than assembled hastily once the game started to matter. Mitchell was at the center of that returning core, and the experience she banked that year, operating as a primary option under playoff pressure, became part of what made the backcourt pairing look so seamless once Clark returned to full health. Mutual respect runs deep. The admiration, notably, does not run in only one direction. Appearing on a podcast hosted by a decorated former point guard, Mitchell was asked directly whether Clark's arrival had created any friction inside the locker room, given how quickly the rookie became the face of the franchise upon her debut. It is a fair question to ask of any veteran suddenly sharing a backcourt with the most hyped incoming player the league had ever seen. Chemistry issues in that kind of situation are common enough across professional sports that the question was less an accusation than a routine one. Mitchell's answer focused less on basketball talent and more on temperament. She described watching Clark's competitive passion stay identical whether she was healthy and playing or sidelined and unable to contribute. A consistency Mitchell said she respected, specifically because it would have been easy for a young star to react differently.
I don't feel like a veteran, which is so crazy. It's only my 4th All-Star, so each time I have an All-Star opportunity.
Once things stopped going her way. Plenty of highly touted rookies, once forced to the sideline by injury, quietly disengage from a team that has moved on without them. Mitchell's account suggested Clark did the opposite, staying invested in a season she could not physically help win. Mitchell went further, describing how the two players share a similar love for the game despite different individual styles, noting simply that they all love basketball the same way. That detail reframes the entire relationship. Clark's praise of Mitchell centers on production and reliability. Speed, cutting, shooting, full-court defense, the measurable pieces of a box score. Mitchell's praise of Clark centers on character under adversity. A rookie superstar who did not let an injury-shortened season curdle into frustration or detachment from teammates who were carrying the weight in her absence. Two very different compliments, pointed in opposite directions, describing the same underlying dynamic from two entirely different vantage points, each one reinforcing the other's credibility. The timing of Mitchell's comments matters as well. They were recorded months before the Fever entered the following offseason, well before restricted free agency turned Mitchell's own future into a live storyline. That sequencing rules out one obvious explanation for the praise, that either player was simply saying the right things ahead of a contract negotiation. Mitchell spoke about Clark's steadiness during a season when her own roster spot was not yet in question, and Clark's most detailed comments about Mitchell arrived in a team-produced video that long predated any specific reporting on Mitchell's free agency status. Neither set of comments appears to have been shaped by the leverage either player held at the time they were made, which makes them considerably more credible as an honest read of the relationship rather than a calculated one. More than just words. It is worth pausing on why this particular set of comments has generated more staying power than the usual round of teammate praise that surfaces during any professional sports season. Athletes are asked constantly to comment on teammates, and the overwhelming majority of those answers are forgettable by design. Safe, generic, interchangeable from one player to the next. Clark's comments about Mitchell stand out specifically because they resist that pattern. They name concrete skills. They repeat across multiple unrelated settings, rather than appearing once and disappearing. And they arrive alongside a front office decision that gives the words measurable consequences, rather than leaving them as pure sentiment. That combination is rare enough to explain the sustained attention on its own, independent of either player's individual star power. A compliment that shows up once, in a single scripted setting, is easy to dismiss as media training. A compliment that shows up in a scripted video, in an unscripted press conference, and in a casual locker room clip, phrased differently each time, but pointing at the same underlying conclusion, is much harder to write off as coincidence or coaching. The consistency itself becomes part of the evidence. There is a useful comparison here to how sports media typically treats teammate relationships.
Reflect and find ways to get better, and but overall I think relationships and communication is really important.
Reporters and analysts often build entire narratives around far thinner evidence than what exists in this case. A single warm exchange, a favorable quote taken slightly out of context, an assumption drawn from body language during a broadcast. This particular relationship offers something sturdier to work with: multiple independent data points, spread across different formats and different moments, all pointing in the same direction, without needing much interpretation or embellishment to connect them. That is precisely what separates a genuine pattern from a manufactured storyline, and it is why this specific set of comments has held up under scrutiny in a way that most passing compliments between teammates simply do not. The power of chemistry. None of this would matter much as a story if the results on the court had not followed the sentiment expressed off it. With Clark healthy again for the current season, the backcourt pairing has returned to full strength, now operating alongside forward Aaliyah Boston as part of what the organization has referred to internally as its core trio. The Fever have used that continuity to sit near the top of their conference standings for extended stretches this season. A marked shift from a year defined almost entirely by absence and adaptation. That shift is not simply a product of Clark's own individual numbers returning to form, significant as they are. It reflects a backcourt that had already been tested under the worst possible circumstances a season earlier, and came out the other side with a demonstrated ability to function without its most famous piece, if it absolutely had to. Coaches often describe depth in terms of statistics or roster size, but the more meaningful version of depth is exactly what the Fever displayed. Two guards capable of anchoring an offense independently, who also happen to elevate each other further when both are healthy and on the floor together. That combination is unusually difficult to build intentionally. Most front offices try to construct it through trades and free agent additions, hoping two acquired pieces develop chemistry over time. The Fever effectively built it through circumstance instead. A rookie superstar's injury forcing an established veteran into a larger role earlier than planned, and that veteran succeeding well enough at the larger role to prove the pairing could work at full strength once health returned. It is a version of team building that cannot be planned on a whiteboard, only recognized and reinforced once it happens on its own. The July exchange that opened this investigation was not an isolated flash of chemistry. It was a small, visible instance of something that has been building for parts of 3 seasons, reinforced by a front office that moved to protect it. A season that tested it under the worst possible conditions, and mutual public praise that has never wavered on either side. Does one teammate calling another the best backcourt partner in the league mean much on its own? Probably not. Paired with a re-signing decision, an injury-tested season, and reciprocal praise from the other player involved, it starts to look less like a compliment and more like an accurate scouting report on exactly what has made this particular Fever roster work. The story of Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell isn't really about one three-pointer or one viral celebration. It's about trust built over seasons, respect earned through adversity, and chemistry that continued to grow when the spotlight was at its brightest. Their words, their actions, and the Fever's commitment to keeping them together all point to the same conclusion. This partnership has become one of the franchise's greatest strengths. As Indiana continues its pursuit of a championship, one question remains. Could this backcourt be remembered as the duo that transformed the Fever into a true title contender? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more WNBA stories. WNBA stories. WNBA stories.